and we went and met for coffee on campus, actually at Kellogg. And he was name dropping all of the very important, people whose books he had edited. And he had a lot of good points, but he spoke over me. He interrupted me. He sort of devalued some of the points that I was trying to make. I had a very clear vision for the book. I wanted input and I wanted to, evolve the idea, but I did feel like I had a good idea. And many publishers were interested in the book. So I felt like I was onto something. And I just had to recognize that this was not going to be a great fit, although he was a very well-known editor, very prestigious, like I said, and had done a wonderful job for other books, but it just didn't feel like the right fit for me. So I had to go for the no in that instance.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Writing is never done. It is just due. This is a common sentiment from anyone who's ever worked in a deadline-driven field like journalism or academia, and it certainly holds true right here in the marketing industry as well. Made all the more difficult in my career personally when I transitioned from print to digital, which really could be changed an infinite number of times, and digital could just never be done sometimes. So I like how my next guest put it when I read her podcast guest application. Don't let perfection get in the way of completion. It's something I have to remember every single day. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Kelly Cutler, Associate Director of the Spiegel Research Center and a lecturer at Northwestern University. Thanks for joining us, Kelly.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, let's take a quick look at your background so people know who I'm talking to. Kelly has worked at AOL Time Warner and Apartments.com. She had a digital marketing agency, which she sold. She's done tech and digital marketing consulting for 2 decades. She's been a program director at Northwestern University. And for the past 8 years, she has been at Northwestern, where she is a full-time faculty member, teaching both at the Medill School of Journalism, Media, and Integrated Marketing Communications, the Kellogg School of Management, and the School of Professional Studies. I said both. That's actually 3 schools if anyone's keeping score at home. Northwestern, I'm sure you've heard of it, but in case you haven't, Northwestern is the oldest chartered university in Illinois and has an annual operating budget of $3 billion, a well-known and prestigious institution. And Cutler has published 5 papers on topics including ChatGPT and Web3. She recently published her first book called Search Marketing, A Strategic Approach to SEO and SEM. So Kelly, give us a sense. What is your day like as an associate director at the Spiegel Research Center and a lecturer at Northwestern?
Well, no day is the same as the day before it or the day after it in my world. But in general, I spend a lot of time researching, as I'm sure you could probably guess, whether it's for a survey or a study that we're putting together through Spiegel, or writing a paper, or even researching a book topic. So good chunk of time is spent on research. And then also I spend a lot of time working on my courses. So either course development or grading or posting to discussion boards, commenting, providing feedback to students. I do a lot of office hours during the week with students as well. Love to spend time with my students. That's a great delight and wonderful part of my job. And then I also still do some consulting work. I like to keep a foot in the industry. So on any given day, I'll be, working with a client on either their digital marketing strategy or some technology that they're building, or helping facilitate a group brainstorm. So lots of different balls in the air at any one given time.
Well, let's see what we can learn from that juggle, from that unique career. We got academia, we got content creation, we got actually working in the field. Here's the first lesson you mentioned, referencing this famous quote. I've heard it attributed Blaise Pascal, Mark Twain, but I've always loved this quote. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. So how have you learned this lesson in your career?
Yeah, it's one of the great, sort of lessons that I think has really provided me with the opportunity to continue to grow and kind of do better throughout my career. And it's really very simple. It's the idea of just, kind of editing and really having that ability to look at what I'm putting together and how my audience will sort of, consume that information, whether it's a presentation or a research paper or my book or a lecture that I'm putting together for a class. What I tend to do is start with, something much larger and then go through it, practice it, in some cases actually present it out loud or, record myself. And then, edit it back and really get it down to the core essentials, because as we all know, people only have, so much time in the day. People are busier than ever before. And I actually read a statistic recently that people have a shorter attention span than a goldfish at this point, which is a little bit disheartening, a little bit disturbing. But for anyone who's been, in the front of a room or at a conference delivering a keynote presentation, we know that, you can lose people fairly quickly and they'll start checking their phone or talking to their neighbor. So it's really important to try to keep people's attention and try to be compelling. And I think a big, sort of piece of that is just editing and, do I really need this? And how can I say this in a shorter, more concise way that will really connect with my audience?
Yeah, I want to ask you about this because it probably balances with our next lesson. But that goldfish statistics is very famous. It's been around a long time. And the thing that's funny to me is we thought that back then, and then things like TikTok came out and YouTube Shorts and all these things. I'm like, I wonder how much more true it is today. But let me ask you this: so, how does this lesson about being succinct, how does that affect the assignments you give to your students so they create content this way? And let me tell you why I asked this question. So, my daughter now is a senior in college, but throughout her college and high school career, she would show me her writing, and I would kind of be disappointed in it as a professional writer. I don't know academic writing as well. I got to admit, it's a little bit of a different beast. But I would always talk about how like it was like overly wordy and flowery when it didn't need to be. And I would try to teach her, like, look at all this we can cut out of it and make this read so much better. And she's like, Dad, you don't understand. I have a minimum word count. That's why I'm writing this way. I know it's not good writing. But so fast forward, this is why it's not just for academia. At some point when I was writing, we worked with an SEO agency and they gave me, I won't mention the name, but different SEO software. And so if you know how SEO software works, it also has word counts in there. So then I found myself doing the thing that my daughter was doing. I was writing overly flowery or too long of content just because I had this little like scorecard in this SEO software giving me points for like, adding in a bunch of words or keywords or stuff like that. And that's when the point where I was like, you know what, forget the algorithms. I'm writing for people and I'm going to write really good copy for people. And if it doesn't serve the algorithm, that's fine. So let me come back to the original question I had for you, because I've seen this both in academia and in practice in business, where like word counts drive things as opposed to what should drive things, which is effective communication. So how does this lesson affect how you give assignments to students? Do you say there should be a word count? And if not, then what are you kind of judging them on or encouraging them to do?
It's a great question. And before I answer it, I just want to add one thing, which is in my world, when I think about those, SEO tools and how we can best utilize those, what I like to take away from that is the idea of incorporating keywords. And what I mean by that is that even in a 20-minute presentation, if I say the same word 4 times, people will remember it versus if I explain that topic in 4 different unique ways. So the idea of, some level of repetition, obviously we don't want to sound like a robot. We don't want to sound like we're keyword stuffing. But, the idea of repetition is an incredibly important lesson in succinct communication. And I actually teach in one of my classes a lesson where we participate in watching a YouTube video of the Martin Luther King Jr. speech where he accepts the Nobel Peace Prize. Many students are extremely familiar with other speeches that Dr. King gave, but many have not fully listened to that speech. And it's one of my very, very favorite examples of amazing communication. And one of the lessons is repetition, that he uses certain terms several times throughout a 12-minute or 13-minute speech. And those are the things that people remember. So that's my sidebar on the, sort of topic of keywords. And then in terms of my assignments, I love that question because I've really put a lot of thought and time into this. And one thing that I do is I ask my students to get feedback from their classmates. And that has been a really great opportunity for them to feel like, they can, sort of safely ask for help or ask questions or solicit feedback. They also learn how to provide feedback and help their fellow classmates out. And what I find is that the final deliverable is really something that benefits from that opportunity, and it's something that I think in our jobs we don't do enough. I think that we're too rushed. Oftentimes, we're scared to ask for help. We think we may not look very put together or smart if we're asking for feedback, but really I believe it's the exact opposite. So I love that your daughter is working with you and hopefully maybe asking for some help, or at least a second set of eyes. Because I really think that just, sort of makes us continue to evolve and grow and get better at our trade, because we're refining, we're fine tuning. And that's something that I try to teach my students that goes along with that lesson. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. It's easier to just, sort of dump what we're thinking onto a piece of paper. It's harder to refine it and fine tune it and read it and say it out loud and record ourselves. I always tell my students, I know it's painful, but after you do it a few times, you'll get used to it. And this will really benefit you in your career long term.
Okay. I like that lesson because it really, now we have the next lesson, which balances it well, right? This is a good dyad. And I'm using a fancy academic term because you're on, Kelly. I'm trying to impress you. Normally I wouldn't use a term like dyad, but so in all seriousness, the next lesson is don't let perfection get in the way of completion. So, okay, I thoroughly agree with your first lesson, right? And I try to just call it down. I don't want to have one unnecessary word, not even one unnecessary word, one unnecessary syllable. If a 4-syllable word work, I don't want to use a 6-syllable word. However, I'm in a deadline-driven environment and need to constantly produce. So this next lesson, don't let perfection get in the way of completion. Ouch. So tell me how you learned this lesson and how you balance it against the first lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just sometimes really tricky when you're in the business of creating something that's, at a very high level, right? You want to write something that's really well received, that's really at a high level, right? You want to publish something for an industry piece or for an academic journal, or in my case, when I was writing my book, you have really high standards, and you've read other books or other papers on those topics, and you feel a little bit intimidated that, wow, there's some really good stuff out there, mine has to be even better. And we all have those thoughts, right? But what I found when I was writing my book is that I could have gone on forever. I literally could still be working on the book right now, and thank goodness I'm not. It was published in the end of last year, and I'm glad to be moving on, and now I'm thinking about new projects and new topics. But it's hard, and especially in a field like digital marketing that's always changing, it's very hard to sort of stick with something and determine that, yes, this is good, this is done, this is something I can send off to the presses. Even in my courses, I'm constantly reevaluating the different topics that I'm covering and how deep I want to go into each one. And is SEO still relevant now that there's generative AI, and there's search generative experience, and all of these Copilot, all of these different AI tools? Is SEO still relevant? Well, the answer is yes, it is. And I've got to sort of weigh how much I want to tweak my content and update it, but I also have to finish it because I have to teach that lesson very soon, actually. So I have to sort of just balance getting something completed and knowing that I can always change it again into the future. But, for now, I have to deliver something. I have to hit my deadline, or I have to, sort of complete what I set out to do. And that can be really, really hard when we're hard on ourselves and we have really high standards.
I'm glad you mentioned AI because that's my next question for you. And I wanted to get your thoughts on artificial intelligence in general, also when it comes to search. Because for me, the way I've kind of worked with this kind of two-headed beast of, getting that quality work that's not too long-winded, but also hitting a lot of deadlines lately is with artificial intelligence. We have our own artificial intelligence. I should mention Mech Labs AI. That's the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa, and our patented methodologies in there. And so, while there was a time earlier in my career, and even probably not too long ago, where there were a lot of different steps. There was creative directors and copy editors and copy chiefs, all of these things. And I would edit my team's work and all of these things. Now, especially like working from home. My gosh, artificial intelligence is just a great way to get feedback, to brainstorm while I'm writing, but also to get feedback very quickly. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on. I know you mentioned that you teach your students. I think that's so fantastic that in person giving feedback to each other. But one, your thoughts on using AI for that in a certain level, but also I know we've heard you've just recently written a book about search, and you're we talked about a tech consultant. What is the right role for AI as well? Where we're hearing conflicting stories about, well, you can't use AI with search, you have to use AI with search. So that's kind of a two-part question. What are your thoughts there?
Well, regarding my classes, I do encourage my students to try out the use of AI within, certain guidelines, and I try to provide those guidelines for them so that they don't operate from a place of fear of, doing something they're not supposed to do or doing something wrong or using a tool that they're not supposed to use. So I do try to provide them with some guidelines and some guardrails in terms of what's acceptable. Which for me, as long as they cite the fact that they did use AI, I'm okay with it. And I do encourage them to try out free versions of tools like ChatGPT or Midjourney or Dolly, and many others that potentially could be helpful for them, Grammarly or Jasper, depending on what the use case is. I do try to encourage them because frankly, they're probably using AI already. And if they're not, it's probably because they're afraid. And I never want my students to operate out of a place of fear. I want them to feel very confident in my class and feel very empowered and encouraged by me to, try different things and see what works. So I'm a proponent of AI again, within those certain sort of guidelines. I also talk to them about the fact that sometimes AI can be wrong. It can hallucinate. It can sound like it's right, but it's actually wrong. So, there's this idea of what I call AI with the human touch. And actually, just recently, a large technology company hired me to write a report for them about this exact topic, about helping their team members understand how to sort of ethically use AI in a way that is guided by the human touch. So it's sort of a topic that I'm pretty passionate about and I'm pretty familiar with because I've just gone through this process with one of my clients where we actually wrote out a guide that helped them sort of really navigate, some of the different questions and things that come up when you're thinking about utilizing AI, particularly for marketing and for, content creation or curation, for creating images, things like that. So I think it's a really important topic, and I think it's one we should not shy away from. We should be having these conversations. And then your other question, sort of, how does AI, impact SEO in particular, and SEM? I think both search marketing and search optimization are impacted by AI, hopefully in positive ways. But I continue to watch that, and I continue to monitor the impact of large language models in particular on SEO. I think that tools like Copilot and Gemini have offered in many cases an enhanced experience with search. So I think that's a good thing. But there are also cases where it's been frustrating for people and it's not necessarily providing what they're looking for. I do see a world where, people who are researching, people who are using search engines will also use chatbots, and, they potentially can have different use cases. So I do think that there's an opportunity here for marketers to really understand where these technologies are headed and to, kind of plan for the future. So I talk about that a lot in my class, and I talk about that in my book as well.
Well, what about using AI if we're creating content to try to get, SEO, to try to get search traffic? So I know you're talking about AI for in terms of what's the user experience going to be like when they search. My understanding has been, hey, it's okay to use AI if you do the thing that you're teaching your students to do, cite it properly, source it properly. The algorithms aren't going to overly penalize you for that. But I think there's been also different chatter out there on both extremes of just have AI write everything, Google can't figure it out, or the algorithms can't figure it out, or you can't have AI touch anything or you're going to get penalized like crazy. So I know you've just recently written a book about this. You're doing some tech consulting. I won't ask you to give away everything you're writing up in that report for that company, but do you have any insight onto how we should use AI in creating content as it impacts SEO?
Yeah, I think you're really onto something when you say that it's similar to the message that I have for my students, which is, you know, understanding first off what these tools are providing, what their capabilities are, what information they're trained on. Really having that knowledge base is key, and then from there, utilizing it to the extent that it makes sense, but with that human oversight. So I read something recently that compared some AI generated content to a naked Ken doll, which basically was that it's missing something, uh, which I thought was,
Oh, wow, that's great.
I thought that was fantastic. Uh, so, it really kind of, speaks for itself at that point. And I think it's
Sure.
so true. So if you generate something from a chat bot or from AI, it's missing something, right? It's missing my perspective, my opinion, my take on things. And as a human being with 20 plus years of experience, I have that perspective. I have those opinions. AI has what it was trained on. And so when you use AI, you have to really understand that it's a little bit like the tip of the iceberg, and there should be a lot more beneath the surface that comes, from the human experience.
All right, let's talk about that human being who has 20 years of experience. Let's see what we can get out of our brain that we can't get out of AI. So this is a very human story that I don't think AI could come up with. You said good work has to speak for itself. Tell us how you learned this lesson.
So that was a lesson that I learned actually just over 10 years ago. And basically what happened was I received a phone call, and an individual had contacted me to create something, do some work for her based on an interview that she had had recently with someone who worked at a client that I worked with previously. So what happened was when my new client was interviewing my old client, she brought something up that was work I had done for that client many years ago that was extremely effective for them. And the new client recognized that that was something that would also be very effective for her business. They were competitors, by the way. It was two companies that had competed with each other, and the new client was trying to hire the old client to, to bring in some of that knowledge. So she ended up not hiring the old client that I had worked with, but she came to me and asked me to do some work based on what she had learned about what I had created for the old client. And so the lesson there is that, really good work has to speak for itself. So as much as we want as marketers to market ourselves and put ourselves out there and, sell our ideas and our brainstorming and our products and our services, sometimes we're unable to do that ourselves, but our work can actually do that for us. And I really did learn that lesson through that experience. I was absolutely blown away by the fact that this had come up in an interview and that, this woman had called me based on that conversation.
So that's fantastic. That's a 1 in a million story. But when I hear this too, the thing I think is, a lot of times we'll do the work and then we'll go in the pitch meeting, we'll sell it in a pitch meeting. And sometimes not everyone's in the pitch meeting, right? And sometimes, so you have to make sure that's where it's like, you can't trust them to sell your work for you. Someone just has to see that work and it has to be self-evident. It has to work. So that is, like I said, 1 in a million fantastic story. But I think, even if that doesn't happen to people listening, this has to be true every day. That work has to speak for itself. But this brings up the question, how do you discover what is good and what will perform well? Right. So, for example, I wrote a case study with a marketing agency that was promoting their ebook. I know you just worked on a book, but we could talk about any other example from your career. And they engaged in A/B testing of their ads to determine which message would perform best. So, for example, they were testing a fear message of loss aversion versus a seeking message, a desire for gain. Right. So, we could all kind of guess in a meeting or guess in, when those pitch presentations we talk about what would work better, what would be good work, but they actually tested it and saw it perform best. So for you, Kelly, what have you done in your career to determine what is good work, what will actually perform?
I love that question, and the A/B testing example is terrific, and I recommend that exact process that you just described all the time to my clients. Usually, they take me up on it, not always, because it's a lot of work to create multiple versions of the same ad, especially across a large campaign where you're running a lot of different ads. But that's a great example. I think I'm lucky in that I have sort of a built-in network, which are my students, and I oftentimes will test things out with them. So recently, I wrote a case study, and I utilized two different versions of that case study in two different classes, and I solicited their feedback. I asked them, "What do you think of the case study?" I asked, three or four questions, not a very long interview, but just to get that feedback from them to help me understand the best way to move forward. The case study I thought was, something that would be very useful in future classes and in future, different situations that I'd be in. So it was really important to me to get that feedback. And I think, we can do our best to assume what is going to resonate, what is going to perform better when it comes to ad groups or pieces of content or ad creatives or even copy within an ad. It's really easy for us to assume, but nothing is better than having data to back that up. And I've been in so many meetings where I've just felt so empowered by the ability to show, two things and have, this one performed, 75% better than this one. Done, right? Nobody questions that decision. You just move on. And I love that empowerment that data provides. So I'm a big believer in, soliciting feedback. I do a lot of surveys. I do a lot of things to help kind of build up that quantifiable argument for why we're recommending certain pieces of content or certain ads, those types of things.
Okay, well, we just learned some lessons from some of the things Kelly has made in her career, but we don't only just get to make things as marketers, we also get to make it with people. So in the second half of the episode, we're going to talk about some of the people that Kelly has learned from when she collaborated with them. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. Right now, you can get a free 3-month full scholarship to the AI Guild and a free quick start AI productivity kit at join.meclabsai.com to help you navigate the artificial intelligence marketing revolution. That's join.meclabsai.com. All right, Kelly, so as we talked about, let's look at some lessons from the people you collaborated with. First person you mentioned was Carrie Sullivan, the president of Culminate Strategy. And you said from Carrie, you learned to reach for the stars. So how did you learn this from Carrie?
So Carrie is someone that has always just impressed me with her work ethic and with her expertise in her field. And I think for me, that lesson comes directly from the fact that she decided several years ago, after a very long and very impressive career in marketing, working at large corporations, that she was going to walk away from that, start her own consulting business, and really kind of change gears and move into some new areas of technology and digital transformation and change management. Developed several products around that and has been incredibly successful with that new sort of approach. And I think that's something that's very empowering when you've been in the business for a long time and you take that knowledge and you can bring it into the world in a different, unique way. But I think it's also scary and intimidating. It's a lot easier to sort of keep doing what you're doing versus, kind of pivot and start something new. So that's always been something that has really impressed me and something that I've tried to really emulate. I did something similar when I pivoted to the world of academics. I had taught for many, many years as a side hustle. And then when I was approached to join the faculty of Northwestern, I had to really think long and hard about whether or not that was a pivot that I wanted to make. And it was really scary because a lot of my colleagues are PhDs and lifelong academics and have, very impressive CVs and rosters of publications and books and things that, I hadn't really delved into yet. So I think, pivoting, taking your learning from, a long sort of interesting career and putting that into something new and unique is really impressive. And I think that's something that, is really worth celebrating.
So in hindsight, what would you do the same and what would you do differently in pivoting from, a marketing career, actually doing the marketing, to going into academia? Because I got to admit, from where I'm sitting, academia, it just seems so appealing. Like, one of the things I love, I kind of made a transition from actually doing marketing, working at an agency, having my own consultancy, to now working at Marketing Sherpa, where I get to interview smart people like you, and I get to more write about marketing than do the marketing so much. So that's been a lot of fun for me. But I also do get to be a guest lecturer at universities sometimes, and there's just a little extra pep in my step. Like, I love the academic environment, it's so much fun, and it always does think in the back of my head of, like, maybe at some point in my career, maybe academia would be, a fun place to be. And I'm sure a lot of people listening feel the same. So for our audience, what have you learned? Now, on the flip side too, we worry that, I don't know, academia would be bureaucratic, and, you wouldn't be able to get things done like you could in a small organization, and, move slower than business and all of these things, and dealing with some of the greater things going in just academia right now beyond marketing. So with all that said, for our audience, for me personally, what would you have done the same? What would you have done differently if you could do it all over again, this transition into academia?
Well, for me, I'm very pleased that I did make that pivot and that I did sort of take that risk. There were some lessons that were learned kind of the hard way, I will admit, because I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so you're absolutely right that, an institution, higher education typically will move a lot slower, be harder to sort of get certain things accomplished. There's a great opportunity to collaborate, but there's also a real focus on individual production and sort of building up your own sort of personal brand in a lot of ways. So a lot of those things were things that I kind of learned on the job. But I would say that for me, this was a great decision, and it is absolutely one of the joys of my life to be able to work with the students that I work with. That's my favorite thing, hands down, about it. I love the energy. I love the sort of perspective that they bring. I love knowing that I have a chance to interact with Generation Z. As well as millennials and Gen X. I teach in, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I teach in undergraduate, a couple of master's programs, and I teach an exec ed at Kellogg. So I really get to work with people across the spectrum of generations. I've worked with people who have 40 years of marketing experience, and then I've worked with juniors in undergraduate college level classes and everything in between. So I really enjoy that. You mentioned your daughter's a senior. I have a daughter who's a sophomore in college, and I feel more connected to her because I have this experience working with these students. So I just absolutely can't say enough about that part of the experience. For me, has been incredibly rewarding and frankly a lot of fun. It's just fun to get to be around those people with that energy that they bring, and being on campus with them is just really a great opportunity. So I really enjoy that. I think in terms of things that I would have done differently, I think maybe I would have spent a little bit more time. I did this a little bit, but maybe not enough with friends of mine who were in academia, and really understanding more about the day to day and the research side of it. And there are basically three components to being a clinical professor at a university, which is what I am, which are people who work in industry. They're not on tenure track PhD. They're kind of the folks that are either coming out of the industry or, like myself, still work in the industry. So you have to have teaching excellence. You also have to have creative research and publication excellence. And then you also have to have service excellence. And I really didn't understand that. It was never explained to me. And now that I know that, it's very helpful to understand, sort of what helps you succeed in the university setting. So, I'm definitely working on that, and it's a work in progress. Even though I've been there for a while now, I'm still continuing to learn and try to grow into the academic that I aspire to be. So I think, there's probably some work ahead of time that someone could do. That being said, what you're doing is great. I always recommend, when people ask me, how did you make the pivot into academics and what did that look like? The first step is guest lecturing. There's no question. That's what I did. And I, like you, greatly enjoyed it and found it to be something that was very fulfilling and very exciting. And you mentioned it gives you a pep in your step. That's how I feel every week when I teach. I get totally like an adrenaline rush. I get excited. I love that feeling. So guest lecturing is a great way to start. And then, if you were to really think about it, what type of program would you want to teach in? What would that look like? What would a class actually look like? And from there, you just start to kind of brainstorm and have fun with it and talk to the people that you know and network if that's something that you're interested in. But for sure, the very first step is guest lecturing and just, starting to be part of um, that world and that community and seeing kind of how that feels.
So this brings up your next lesson, which I wonder if you can't do as much in academia as you could in business. But I'll tell you this: I got a master's certificate a few years ago, a graduate certificate, and in taking those classes, I realized this was a gap I had. Your lesson is one word: delegate. You said you learned it from AJ Goyal, the president of Wordson. And I didn't even realize that I'd gotten to a place in my career where there's a lot of things I didn't necessarily do hands-on, whether it's creating a presentation, whatever it is. I had a team and I delegated. And the great thing about delegation is there's, everyone's doing hopefully their best skill if we're doing it correctly. But then as a student in graduate courses, I couldn't delegate, right? So tell me, how did you learn this lesson, delegate? How did it apply to your marketing career, but also in academia?
One thing that I really learned specifically from AJ, who's a good friend of mine and also a serial entrepreneur who has developed, grown, and sold many different businesses over the course of his career, is he said that it was important to work on your business, not in your business. And that, it's fairly easy to hire people to do specific work and, people with specific skills. What's really hard, though, is to strategize and grow a company into something that someone will ultimately want to acquire or buy. So that was a good lesson for me. When I had started my first company back in 2003, which was a search engine marketing firm, I felt very overwhelmed with having to do everything myself and, really, sort of everything from pricing to client work to setting up my, invoicing software to buying office space to hiring an attorney to help me write a contract. Every little thing sort of came together and I felt very overwhelmed by that. But once I started to hire people, I started to realize what I was good at and what I could really do to help grow the business. And that was more important than, doing something, more menial that I could potentially hire somebody to do. So that was a really great lesson. I think in higher education, it's a little bit different. It doesn't function exactly the same way. Although I have brought in work study students and I have hired editors to help me with citations and things that are really difficult for me to do on my own, like with my book, for instance, which had hundreds and hundreds of citations, which had to be submitted in the exact right way. And with academic publishing, that's the case as well. So I think just delegating and knowing what I'm good at, what I bring to the table, what I should be focusing on, and understanding the things that I'm not as good at, where I can, sort of bring in the reinforcements to help, has been really eye-opening for me.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you have an example of something that you wouldn't delegate and why you wouldn't delegate it? Because, when we talk about this topic, moving up in your career, seems like more and more and more delegation, right? But one of the things that we've always taught is, hey, even if you're the CMO, even if you're the biggest marketing leader in the company, don't delegate the marketing message. Don't delegate the creation of the value proposition, right? So yes, it makes one thing once you've got those things right. You have an agency, you have a copywriter, whatever the execution of that. But no matter, even if you're more of a technical CMO or, whatever type of CMO you are, like, don't delegate the value proposition. Don't delegate the messaging. That element is just so crucial to an organization. So for you, Kelly, like, how did you figure out, and we talked generally about this, but do you have an example of, okay, the contracts the lawyer can do, but here's something that in business, I will not delegate, and here's why I won't delegate it.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few different examples, but one that kind of just popped into my head. I'm actually consulting with a client right now. I'm pretty engaged in their marketing and communication efforts throughout their organization. And, I've sort of given them a similar message, which is you could hire somebody to just do all of your marketing, but no one knows your customers better than you do. And so what I've done is I've created a series of workshops where I am providing them with frameworks and real world examples and actually facilitating workshops and, brainstorm sessions where we're actually doing this work together. And I think in some ways, this client was a little disappointed up front because they were hoping that, I would come in and just say, okay, I'm going to hire a marketing director and you guys are all off the hook. But I didn't do that because I really believe in decentralized marketing. I really believe that the owners of each business within this organization know their customers much better than a third party ever could. And so what I've done is I have spent the time and rolled up my sleeves to train them and to give them the tools that they need. Another sort of example that's adjacent is that I did consider sending them a bunch of resources and, maybe your podcast, Daniel, that might be one of the resources, and, several other resources that I'm familiar with that I use in my classes, and just sort of hoping that they get it. But I knew that I couldn't delegate in that way. So I did give them pre-work and I did give them resources, but then I spent the time really working through what that all meant and how they could apply it. And actually, again, facilitating those conversations where we're all brainstorming and we're, whiteboarding and we're co-creating this message together versus having them, completely isolated doing that on their own or me just doing it for them.
Right. So all of that, I love it. But at the end of the day, we have to execute, right? So we get those red ideas, and that's what you're talking about. Then we have to execute. And this is where sometimes we could fall down. So I love this final lesson from you. Don't give up. You learned this from Roy Wallen, a lecturer in marketing at Northwestern University. So how did you learn this from Roy, and how do you live it in your career?
Yeah, it's a great one. Roy is a great friend of mine, and we refer to each other as partner because we teach two courses that sort of piggyback each other really nicely within the IMC master's program at Medill at Northwestern, and we talk a lot about all of the different projects that we always have going. He's like me, still keeps a foot in the industry and has a lot of, plates in the air that he's juggling just like I do. And, one thing that I've really learned from Roy is that he's always reinventing and trying new things. And, that gets harder and harder as you're more advanced in your career. As I mentioned, it's easy sometimes to just sort of keep doing the same thing you've always been doing. But as you know, Daniel, technology changes, the times change, the work environment changes, AI comes into play. All of these things are happening real time. And so we have to adjust. We have to continue to evolve and we have to continue to change. And that's something I've definitely learned from Roy is this idea of like, just never give up, be tenacious, keep going for it, keep reinventing. And that's something I've done a lot with my classes as well. I taught a class just 2 years ago. It's hard to imagine. 2 years ago, I taught a class at Kellogg called Web3 and the Future of Marketing. And it was all about blockchain and NFTs, which are really just, not top of mind anymore. I changed that class last year to become generative AI in the future of marketing. And so, I continue to evolve and I continue to reinvent myself and my classes based on the trends that are happening right now that are top of mind for my students and my clients. And that's what led to writing that paper for one of my clients on the use of AI and technology, because I had that, background with the class that I had just developed.
Yeah, I hear you that don't give up is so important as we have to evolve our career. As I've mentioned before, I started writing print ads and look what we're doing now. There's AI and all these other things like I never could have envisioned. But the other place don't give up has really hit me in my career is when you have to say no to someone. That could be no to a client, that could be no to a business leader, that could be no to, university administrators. And I wonder if you have an example of that. When I interviewed Liz Haar, a partner at Hinge, on How I Made It Marketing, one of her lessons was don't give clients whatever they ask for. And she told the story about researching what clients wanted to do for an event and then having to tell them that they shouldn't do that and why. That can be one of the hardest things to do. And that can be something we could just want to give up and be like, fine, let's let them do whatever they want. So do you have any examples there in your own career of how you had to kind of have that tenacity and not give up and tell someone no?
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually have a term for it. I call it going for the no. And it's something that I've done throughout my career. And honestly, when I recognize that it's just not going to be a good fit for whatever reason, it can be just, sort of a vibe. It can be that they're asking for things that I know are not the right things. Oftentimes clients can be very adamant on what it is that they think they need. And, I'm not in the business of just executing someone's idea. I'm in the business of strategy and consultation. And so oftentimes, it's just not a good fit for a multitude of different reasons. And actually, when I was shopping around my book idea, I had to use the going for the no concept with editors. Because believe it or not, very often I was met with an editor that I just didn't feel understood me, and we weren't vibing. It just wasn't working. So, and I thought that was a really important relationship to cultivate, because I wanted to be able to utilize that person and their expertise. And I wanted to feel valued, and I wanted to feel like I had a voice in the room, but that also we would be collaborating quite a bit. So there's so many examples that I can use of going for the no. But the most recent one would probably be with the editor. There was one editor in particular that I felt was really not a good fit. It was a very well-known, very prestigious imprint. And I met with the gentleman. He actually asked to meet in person, which most do not do. And we went and met for coffee on campus, actually at Kellogg. And he was name dropping all of the very important, people whose books he had edited. And he had a lot of good points, but he spoke over me. He interrupted me. He sort of devalued some of the points that I was trying to make. I had a very clear vision for the book. I wanted input, and I wanted to, evolve the idea, but I did feel like I had a good idea, and many publishers were interested in the book. So I felt like I was onto something. And I just had to recognize that this was not going to be a great fit, although he was a very well-known editor, very prestigious, like I said, and had done a wonderful job for other books, but it just didn't feel like the right fit for me. So I had to go for the no in that instance.
And I think that's a great example, because it's so easy to have that confirmation bias. Like you said, like even before you met with that editor, just to know you're going to sit down with that person, be like, oh, this will be great. And you can, I know if it was me, I'd be envisioning in my mind how it could work and all that stuff. And then like, once you're going through that conversation, if it was me, I'd be like, oh, but it's fine, and then, but you have to force yourself to come to that realization. No, I gotta do what's right for this book and what's right for me. So I love that example. All right, Kelly, we talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer from all of your lessons and all of your stories. If you had to break it down directly, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Such a great question. And I would boil it down to 3 C's: curiosity, communication, calculated risk taking. There are so many others that I could talk about, but to me, those 3 are so important and oftentimes overlooked. I think we think about creativity, we think about data and analytics, we think about, really tactical things, right? Like you have to know how to, use the self-service ad platform in Google Ads or Facebook or LinkedIn. You have to know, Google Analytics. You have to, and all that stuff is super important. But I think also you have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You have to engage with your team, your customers, all the people around you, because you want to continue learning. And curiosity is how you do that. Communication, it's so easy these days to work in a silo. So many people are working from home, and Slack is the main communication channel. It's so rare that people will say, hey, let's jump on a call. Let's talk more in person. Let's go grab a coffee. But that meaningful communication channel, it really opens up so many more opportunities to build a relationship, to learn more, and to get into that kind of curiosity. And then calculated risk taking, I just think, we're really, really in our silos. We're afraid sometimes to, think outside of the box, or to be the person that says, hey, we should try something we've never done before. So I really encourage folks to embrace that and take those calculated risks. If we try 10 things, 2 or 3 of them are probably going to work out. I always say, most of them probably will not, and that's okay. A couple of them will work out, and that will be great for our business to, embrace those new opportunities moving forward.
Well, I like that, like a true teacher at the end, breaking it down to 3 things. And I got to say, because most teachers would have gone with an R for that last one, but you worked it into those 3 C's, so they're memorable. Thank you so much, Kelly. I learned so much from you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.